Hello, all out there. This is Dave March from Land of Confusion, and we're doing another one of these foreign policy Afghanistan videos again. And joining me today is my co-host, Flicker.
How do you do?
And once again, we're bringing our two other panels of experts in, Sea Writer and Postmodern Hoplite. So if we want, I'll just go to grab the questions that we have here. And I think Brian is the first one asked is, how can America rebuild its foreign cachet in the future? I mean, first we need a new president and all, but where do we go from here, I guess, now that we've escaped from there?
Well, yeah, the challenge is, as Brian said, I think this came from Brian Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
I did take a look at the list before coming in. The simple fact of the matter is it's going to be a very long time. I'm going to estimate probably something on the order of at least 4 to 5 years, depending upon a lot of other factors that are intangibles. America is essentially going to have to commit itself to a hard fight that requires perseverance and a lot of resources, and show that with a change in administration, the American people as a nation are prepared to accept the kinds of losses that we then are asking of other allies to shoulder on our behalf. The sad thing is the American people ought not to be expected to pay that kind of price to rebuild American credibility in the absence of effective grand strategy and effective strategic leadership, which there just is no immediate prospect on the horizon for that occurring. I would say the best we might hope for, and this is a terrible thing to say to hope for, because perhaps within 5 years, but in order for that to happen within 5 years, we're going to be looking at a major conflict somewhere that is going to make demands of America's national treasure, and that's a policy, and it's a strategy and policy euphemism for the blood of young Americans. And I hate to sound dire about it, but that's the truth. We're going to have to show that the American people are going to have to show that they're willing to have skin in the game before we can expect any other nation to trust us again.
I think you're more optimistic than I am.
Well, I did say at the earliest 5.
Right.
Yeah,
I think it's more likely to be 10 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're talking about half a generation.
I think it'll be at least a generation.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that when the British were evacuating Crete, the Royal Navy was taking very heavy losses, and Admiral Cunningham was urged to stop the withdrawal. His comment at that point was, "We can build a ship in 3 years. It takes 300 to build a tradition." We've really stepped in it with this one because we not only betrayed the Afghans, in many ways we betrayed our NATO allies as well.
Mm-hmm.
The good news about that is maybe they'll take their own defense seriously, because if I were Germany or England or France, I would not count on the United States to protect me against Russia. If I were Japan, I could not see them trusting the United States. One of the fallouts I see happening from this is wide-scale nuclear proliferation, because Japan, Taiwan, South Korea are all capable of building atomic weapons tomorrow. The main reason they have not is because they thought the United States had their back. They can't go that route anymore. Not for at least 3 years until we have a new president. But even then, what this has shown is that a single bad president can undo the work of, in this case, 20 years, and in a very real sense, the 70-year NATO commitment. So, okay, we get a reasonable president next in 2024, but what are the feckless American people going to do in 2028 or 2032, and do you bet your country's safety and freedom on that?
This is predicated on Biden not doing anything and not changing his mind, right?
It would be awfully hard to unscramble this egg at this
Yeah.
point.
I would have to Mark, I'm not disagreeing with any of the truth of what you just said.
Mhm.
I would make the following 2 caveats. One, Biden didn't undo the good work of 20 years. Biden merely took advantage of the fact that the 3 previous administrations all had failed to provide the strategic vision to the American people. I would argue that the next administration, if faced with the kind of crisis that we're now prepared to respond to, I think that kind of effective leadership at the national command level would in fact rally the American people, and we can rise to that challenge. I'm not saying that I'm not by any means being rosy and optimistic about it. I'm saying I can see the set of circumstances that would lead to that. It won't be this president, because this president is already, when we look at his 50-year record, he almost engineered what happened in Afghanistan to be able to validate what he was saying was the inevitable end state all along. Do I think that he was conscious enough to engineer this? No, I don't give him that much intellectual credit. But I do believe that as this unfolded, he was getting the validation of saying, look, I've said this is going to end this way all along. See how right I was.
Mhm.
He really does present that he believes that he predicted this,
Mhm.
predicted it all along, and this validates why he's this brilliant individual. Well,
Mhm.
the fact that we can point out any number of lies that led to that doesn't change the fact that he's getting the validation that he always wanted.
Mhm.
Now, setting that aside for a moment, I had my students were asking this over in a seminar session yesterday, and they asked, what happens next? I said, I believe that communist China is going to look, and they can move within the next 3 to 5 years in an aggressive way against Taiwan, knowing that the United States is not going to commit the blood and treasure to protect Taiwan if China moves aggressively. I believe that and this is, I could be entirely wrong. As I've said in my posts, I've been wrong about a lot of things. I hope I'm wrong on this. But I believe that if in 2023, it appears that if Biden looks weak and the polls indicate that he's going to lose big in 2024, in 2023, they're going to move. Because I believe that they have enough private intel on the Biden family that they're basically going to let him know this is in your best interest to sit out. And that's going to be the argument that he makes to the American people, that I kept us from getting into a war with China. If Biden looks like it's going to be close and Biden might win, if that's how they perceive it, then I believe they're going to push their timeline to 2025. And in the first year of a second Biden administration, that's when they're going to strike, because they know they'll still have the same weak leader who just believes that anything that profits the Biden family is good for America. And that's how he's always conducted his business. He's always conducted himself, personal wealth, family wealth, tribal wealth. He actually has a great deal in common with the Afghan tribal mentality.
Right.
He really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
That's why he gets along so well with the Taliban.
and I think that China is going to gauge what they choose to do by looking at what are the prospects, because if a strong leader, and I don't know who that might be, who comes in and says, I realize that the US completely trashed its reputation. We're going to start rebuilding that, but that's going to be a huge commitment. He can bring the American people along with that, but he has to make it clear, and none of our allies are going to trust us until we put that up first.
Right. Right.
A couple things, thoughts there. So one thing has been kind of forgotten this, but I've heard it in a few other places talked about. And one of the reasons, the theories is that Joe is doing this is because of Bo, and he blames the war on terror, for killing his son early. He has cancer, but there's some belief that he basically got exposed to some sort of like industrial waste, because my understanding, the United States Army doesn't do a very good job cleaning up some stuff sometimes. And Biden might be blaming the military for killing his favorite son early and leaving him with the other one.
I've heard that.
Mm.
I don't mean to sound uncaring toward any family who lost a loved one, but the simple fact of the matter is there's literally no evidence connecting Bo Biden's service as a JAG officer, with any exposure other than just being generally in theater. I happen to have been stationed at a location in Kuwait, Camp Spearhead, where we literally got exposed to heavy industrial exposure, petroleum-based chemical plants, all kinds of stuff. We regularly got slimed with that stuff. I have the documentation that shows when I was there, what the levels of and I keep all that paperwork. I'm grateful that I have not had any of the respiratory or health issues that came from that, but I can document exactly when I was exposed. If the Biden family had any documentation to show that Bo had been exposed as a JAG officer, Biden would have already made political hay with that. He's convinced. I don't know what his mindset is. He tries to pretend that he's a Gold Star family, and I'm sorry, he's not. There's no evidence to suggest that and I don't really honestly believe he's grieving all that much now. I think it's a convenient excuse. As a veteran, as someone who was in that environment, I have very little patience for his cheapening that way.
Yeah.
Well, he blames the truck driver for the accident that killed his wife, when it was apparently she was the one that ran the stop sign, this is
not
all what you're saying is classic Biden.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
He's behaved this way his whole life.
Yeah. And we were also talking about the Biden crime. He's considered the most corrupt family. I always just assumed he was just until he ran for president. I always just assumed he was in bed with like the insurance agency because that's what runs Delaware. And Marco Rubio is a pretty great guy, but if you ever have to hear him talk about the sugar industry in Florida, it sounds like his family's being held hostage somewhere. But so I just assumed that was it. And then I found out all sorts of things about he's considered the most corrupt, makes the Clintons look nice.
He is Romanesque in his corruption. He reminds me a lot of some of the Roman proconsuls during the late Republic era.
Yeah. One last thing. I don't think it's going to be Taiwan. I think they are going to press. Taiwan's a big thing to roll. It's going all in. If you blow that one, it's a bad thing as a thing. I think they're going to press somewhere else, and maybe like try and trap a carrier group somewhere and blow it up, or that I just think that going all in on Taiwan is a tough one.
Yeah, the other problem is the longer the Chinese put this off, the more opposition they're going to face, because it's as I said, there's no reason why Taiwan and Japan can't be producing nuclear weapons inside of 3 months. And that would add a whole different dimension to an invasion of Taiwan. And I could see the Japanese coming to the aid of the Taiwanese, because they have an interest in seeing Taiwan and South Korea remain non-Chinese clients, or they'll end up getting flanked. Again, South
Mark,
Korea,
I think you make you're certainly you're right with regards to the domestic capability that both Japan and Taiwan have. I'm not well enough versed on what Japan certainly has the means for a domestic weaponized uranium program. They already have that. I'm unaware, and that just because I haven't studied the issue, regarding what Taiwan's current domestic capability is. I think the point you made regarding Chinese demographics, that's why I tend to, my expectation is it's going to happen sooner than later. And I do believe that China ultimately thinks that as long as the US stays out of it, they will be able to absorb Taiwan with acceptable losses. I don't believe that Taiwan is going to yield, but in the absence of the kind of power projection capability that the US provides, I think that's where their calculus is going to be, is can we do this without incurring an actual response from the United States?
right.
And that's I'm just, as I say, I'm reading the same tea leaves as everyone else, and I wouldn't say that anything I'm predicting is particularly unique.
The other thing I'll point out, though, is after Afghanistan, Biden might be in a position where he feels he has to come to the defense of Taiwan, because right now, I think they were polling that 80% of the Americans feel we should protect Taiwan, and his administration took one heck of a shot due to Afghanistan. But if this happens again on his watch, he's not going to win re-election.
So that's what makes me think that first of all, China is going to want to deflect attention away from this issue for at least the next 2 years. So I don't expect China out in the public sphere to push this issue. They have enough other places that they can create tension with the US without it being Taiwan. But I do think that Taiwan that's the big prize.
Oh yeah.
Up until about looking, I would say, a decade to and beyond, when their focus is going to shift to Siberia. And that's going to be the next push after, but it's going to happen after Taiwan.
I think they're just going to try and saber route. They're going to grab something like Senkaku Islands first. And
perhaps,
then,
there's something to be said for that.
That's a lot less. And if America reacts to that, they'll be like, okay, fine. But if they can get that, and then they'll escalate to Taiwan. They'll test the waters a bit with a lower risk operation and see how
there's certainly you're making a good argument there. But I would say is that alerting, they've got to seize Taiwan fast and intact. And if they can make it appear, if they're counting on that, seizing Taiwan fast and intact maintains the economic position and the supply side benefit that current Taiwanese, particularly when it comes to semiconductor, that industry, they want that whole and intact. They gain no benefit other than the honor, which let's not dispute that's a powerful motivator. But in terms of the real benefit, the wealth that it brings to China, you've got to seize Taiwan intact, which means it's largely going to be a diplomatic. The military is going to be not that it's bluff, but it's got to appear strong enough that it's a done deal, and then you make the Biden administration believe that the honorable thing to do is avoid an open conflict. And I believe that the Biden administration is very susceptible to that.
Especially if you give them their 10% big guy.
Yeah.
Speaking,
I honestly, this is just a hunch, but I believe that they have means of motivating the current administration that simply just don't appear in a standard grand strategy calculus.
Yep. Okay. Well, we have another question here. It's from James Salerno, and he's going to take us back. It is about China and in Afghanistan. So what exactly is China going to gain in Afghanistan? He's not convinced that puts China ahead when we have those resources more in Alaska. Do they gain intellectual capital? No. He just wants to know, is there anything worth taking in Afghanistan for China other than position?
I think counting coup against the United States is more than enough for the Chinese.
Denying America, denying the U.S. Air Force and NATO the means of power projection from a well-defended and well-developed base in Afghanistan, right in the middle of Central America, is worth.
Central Asia.
Yeah, it's just bam.
Yeah.
That having that Central Asian, losing that power projection capability is worth the price of admission for China. China has already been in negotiations with the Taliban to bring Afghanistan under the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, how well that actually turns out for China is difficult to say. Will the Afghan tribal society tolerate 10,000 Han Chinese workers who are brought in to begin mining rare earth metals and build roads and build in 5G towers? Because all of those workers come from China. They're not going to hire local Afghans. That's part of the difference between the Western model of economic development and the Chinese model. Chinese is very mercantile. They're going to bring their own workers, and if the local warlord can't be bought off to provide the security, well, they'll either decide this isn't worth it and the project just ends, but China is not going to then advertise, we quit building this facility because the local security is bad. They'll just simply will drop it and they'll move on to the next thing. As long as China is drawing their slice of the profit and they're operating it, they won't care what happens in the Afghan countryside. They don't consider the Afghans to be human to begin with. If they're not Han Chinese, they're already uncivilized barbarians. Who cares what they do in their own country, so long as tribute to Beijing continues? And that's how the Chinese are remarkably consistent. This is a model that has stood them well for millennia, and there's no reason to think it's going to change now.
I do know there is another reason. God knows, back in the 1990s, if you read Ghost Wars, there's a good book on Afghanistan leading up to 9/11, and the guys are talking about how back the Indians and the Clinton era were desperately trying to work a deal with the Taliban to drive a pipeline through Central Asia, through Afghanistan, and that had been something that everyone wants to happen. So that's definitely, China can make that happen. They'll make it happen.
I'll point out Belt and Road hasn't worked out too well for China in Africa, because the warlords there are more than willing to take the Chinese money and then not deliver.
Yeah.
The difference between Afghanistan and Africa is that Afghanistan's a lot closer to China.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be misunderstood. I'm not recommending I'm not suggesting that Belt and Road has been successful, but it has been a remarkably versatile tool that Communist China has used, and is used, for example, to drive wedge both in the EU and in NATO.
Yeah. You had a question there, Flicker?
Well, yeah, maybe this isn't the time, but it had to do with Biden and his and the Chinese. And do you mind if I ask the questions now?
Go ahead.
All right. Two questions, really. One is the second question is, well, the first question is Biden really at risk with China? You, Clark, it sounds like you're saying that there's stuff that the Chinese can do with the Biden administration that doesn't make the papers. But if it's just a matter of publishing Hunter Biden's hard drive, I think that can be handled. That's the first question. How really bad is Biden bound by China? And the second question is, how long do you think he's going to last, really? And if he doesn't last in office, what is the Harris administration going to? Well, yeah, okay, it's a bit of a joke, but how do you think the Harris administration is going to be any different than the Biden administration?
Well, the first question, Charles, I claim no special knowledge. I have no. I'm merely reading the room, as it were. How has the Biden family behaved, and how has the mainstream media in the U.S. Treated this topic with kid gloves, with very sympathetic, and looking at how the family has behaved in what we do know of both their private business, the private business dealings, and how that they have leveraged the big guys' position in government to profit themselves. Just with what we know, leads me to believe that if Beijing doesn't have a significant dossier on the dealings of the Biden family and their economic interests in China, I will be very, very surprised. It would be completely uncharacteristic of them not to have that information, particularly insofar as we know Hunter Biden is very, very willing to be very open about the degree of graft that he's prepared to accept and funnel into family industries, family businesses. So it's just, as I say, I'm riding a hunch here. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right.
But do you think that that's enough? Do you think that that's enough to control public opinion?
Well,
and
wait a
have
second.
him?
Let me add something, and that is the Chinese have been subsidizing the American entertainment industry as a major market for the companies that run America's news media. And if China were to go to them and say, we want you to run this information about Biden, I think they'd do it, because they wouldn't be willing to take the economic hit that they would face if they defied China in that. So everyone assumes that the media is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democrat Party. I'm beginning to believe it's more a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese Communist Party.
I think that as long as the progressive agenda and the Chinese communist agenda remain aligned, then the media will continue to protect Joe Biden. I believe that as soon as communist China perceives that Joe has outlived his usefulness, whatever that might be, I think that they will cast him aside. You will see immediately all of the media focus will shift to Joe is no longer fit. Bless his heart, he's no longer fit for office. He's given his life for the country, but it's just the job. The presidency is too big a job. He's too old. He's a martyr for what he. They'll make whatever excuse they need to make, but I believe that they'll chuck him over the moment he ceases to be useful.
Yes.
Now, the prospect of a Harris administration. I'm on record for predicting that about September we would start seeing the leaks coming out of the White House. The president just his health is declining, his memory is going, he's becoming less and less coherent. I think we're seeing that evidence to a certain extent anyway. Mm-hmm. I didn't factor in that the hostility between the White House staff and the vice president's staff. And I failed to appreciate how much they deeply dislike each other, mm-hmm. And the degree to which Harris was seen as a hedge against this very thing. That the Democratic Party is looking at it and going, heavens no, we can't. Harris has shown she can't win an election. She's shown that she can't win a national election that isn't in a deep blue controlled state, because otherwise she'd have made it beyond the first, she didn't even make it to the first round of the primaries. Right. She has shown herself to be such a thoroughly unlikable person. Now, the fact that she has literally no policy experience to speak of just goes along with that. I think the Democratic Party is they're going to until they have to deal with chucking Biden over the side, they don't like the prospect of Harris because they don't like Harris in 24. But once again, that's more a domestic thing, and my opinion is.
You guys also have to remember something about Harris is the fact she is the vice president. In order to get a new vice president appointed, you have to get a vote through the Senate. And without her there being tie breaking, the Republicans could block any nomination for the VP that they don't like.
Well, except the Democrats would probably pick someone like Murkowski.
I think they would probably pick a Republican senator.
Yeah, it would be the way to round it.
That's, but if for whatever my prediction is worth, my guess is that they'll if Harris, and remember, Joe has to completely resign if he's sequestered because of the 25th Amendment. Harris is only the acting president. She doesn't get to name a VP. She is acting president only until either Joe resigns, or Joe dies, or the election happens,
or he's removed.
But for him to be removed, if he's removed by way of the 25th, she still remains. As I understand the 25th Amendment, if he's not removed by way of impeachment and removal from office, he remains president, but he is not. She is the acting president because of medical disqualification. So if that's the case, no VP. Let's assume for a minute that he has a stroke tomorrow. Heaven forbid that happens, and she ascends to the presidency through the means of simply becoming the president. She takes the oath of office. I believe that she reaches out to someone like Susan Collins, where it's likely that she'll be replaced by a Democrat. I could once again be mistaken. I thought that the governor of Maine was a Democrat. I would need to check. But essentially, she checkmates what's the Senate going to do? Vote against one of their own Republican senators? Well, that would take tremendous backbone.
Yeah,
I wish they did, but that's what I think she would do.
Does anyone remember before? I remember Pelosi speaking before the election, saying that we're passing legislation, or we're working on something that's going to clarify the 25th Amendment. And the way it came out in the press, even on the right-wing press, was this doesn't have to do with Trump. And I'm looking back on it now. We do have this issue with Biden actually remaining president even if he's taken out or disempowered by the 25th Amendment. Does anyone know what Pelosi was talking about when she said that they were clarifying the 25th Amendment?
Yeah, Flicker, I've just got to admit that really is outside of my expertise.
Yeah.
We'd be better off getting, Arizona Patriot or I think Jerry Gordino, which he had some really good questions on the list. We really ought to get someone who's better qualified. I can see his face. CT Law is a good one to
he
perhaps
won't come on the show
invite.
though, but I've asked.
Yeah, I would, and I can appreciate why he'd be a little reticent because, he's got real skin in the game where he lives. So I would just have to say it's a fascinating question. I really feel uncomfortable commenting on that because it's outside of my.
Yep.
I'm just not a constitutional lawyer.
So I'm looking at what happened back. I found an article here, and basically it was they were talking about Trump because he got COVID, and they basically formed the Commission on Presidential Capacity to Discharge the Powers and Duties of the Office. The bill does not look like it went through the Senate, but basically it was going to create a commission of doctors who would say if the president is healthy or not if the amendment got revoked.
Yeah, my guess is that it was a publicity stunt because it wouldn't survive constitutional muster.
Yeah.
The president first thing would do would make an immediate appeal to the Supreme Court and they would look at it and go, this is.
And I don't think it's actually meant like that. It's more like the 25th has been invoked. We need to have a group of doctors here are going to give a recommendation to Congress. I think that's more what this thing was. This is not
that might well be, but that's not what the 25th Amendment says.
Yeah, exactly.
I just think that was the speaker going for some cheap points.
Cheap points during COVID. That looks like what it was.
Yep.
Okay. I think we can get on to another question here. That was James Salerno. We have E. Herring up next. Okay, she's asking about some of the stuff that why wouldn't an administration flee from an embassy, then work with the terrorist is fleeing from? What do you think will how will this affect recruitment and retention? And she's asking more of the trust questions about our allies. But basically, what the heck were these guys thinking? I think is the thought. From what I understand is that they're drawing down troops during the course of the summertime. And at some point, listening from the last main flagship show when they had the congressman on, and he basically said they had a choice. They could either defend the embassy or defend the airport. And they chose to abandon Bagram and defend the embassy. And in my view, if I were one of the generals advising the president, I'm saying, Mr. President, you either have to, we can't choose the embassy, we need to evacuate now. We'll hold Bagram until we can get everyone else. We've lost. And sounds like he either ignored it or none of the guys, those generals sitting around the table had the guts to resign in protest over the decision, because that would have been what I would have done.
I think that's pretty close. I have to admit, I've never seen a failure in planning this bad in the United States military. I'm not sure where to go from there.
Yeah, okay. So was it intentional? Do you think this was like the general said, fine, screw you, we'll just make it the worst way possible?
Well, okay. I mean, I had a fellow veteran and I were talking about this very question. And on the one, part of the problem is when the military advisors are saying, Mr. President, the number of troops that are authorized available to us, this is what we have in country. This is what we have to work with. We can defend this location or we can defend this location. We cannot do both. What is your priority? and the president says, my priority is the embassy. Boom. That's everything that I've read and heard about the decision entirely corresponds to what my own, limited 06 level knowledge is. The problem then comes in when I look at the previous 4 years, where every time Mr. Trump would propose some emotionally satisfying but ill-conceived military policy, that the military infrastructure would both by basically slow walking, dragging their feet, undercutting that, and they felt confident enough that they could undercut until they could convince the president to change the policy or at least delay. They very clearly didn't feel that they could do that this time. That for whatever reason, the senior military staff seems to have hitched their star to the administration and said, we're not going to do what we did previously. That when the president says, out by this date, we're not going to work around, we're not going to bring why it can't be done. We're going to lay out, well, we can do Bagram or we can do the embassy. We can't do both. And when he says, we'll do the embassy, yes, sir. And the fact that that was not sustainable in terms of maintaining the security environment, once it became clear that the assumptions that went into that decision were no longer valid, what the generals are trained to do is that when the conditions on the ground change, when the assumptions turned out to not to be true, you're supposed to go back and rewrite the plan. They didn't do that. They stuck with the timeline that the president wanted. And nobody had, for whatever reason, no one was going to stand up to him. And I simply don't believe that Mr. Biden is so strong a leader that he could overwhelm their objections.
Yeah.
I just don't believe it. They were inclined. They wanted to give the president what he wanted, and they were not prepared to make the personal sacrifice. If they truly didn't believe it could be done or it was supportable, they weren't prepared to do as their duty demanded. If they truly believed that what they were being ordered to do was not supportable, duty demands that you either disobey the order and do what is right, or you resign because you tell you tell your commander, I can't carry out this order. I cannot carry out this order. I understand, you find someone else who can, but it can't be me. And you hand them your letter of resignation, and you walk out the door, and you fully prepare to accept that your career is over. I don't think these guys are willing to do that.
That's sad.
Yes, and this is an idea that's been percolating my head since our last conversation, and that is the professionalist perspective that professionals, regular army, regular standing forces are inherently superior to citizen soldier or militia-based forces. They have had 67 plus years where the professionals have been 100% in control of the U.S. military policy. And what they have resulted in, when you look at when they had 20 years to win a war, they failed. We have to, as a people, as a nation, we have to start asking the hard questions of whether or not the inherent assumed advantages of the professionalist perspective can it be justified? And this is coming from someone who dearly loves the Army, 30 years a soldier. I say this almost with tears in my eyes, but the fact of the matter is, after 20 years, they cannot look at their track record. This isn't to question the fighting ability of any individual soldier, Marine, sailor, or airman. We're not talking about the junior enlisted ranks. We're not talking about the company grade officers. We're talking about the senior grade. We're talking about the senior leaders. And they all came up through the system. None of them can claim not to have been developed in this worldview. And the fact of the matter is, they cannot point to what happened in the last 3 months and claim that it worked.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
That's a very bitter pill for me to swallow. It's even harder for me to say out loud. But if we don't start asking these questions and looking at them very hard, then the situation isn't going to change.
What scares me is the military seems to be running away from that examination.
Well,
After Vietnam, they went in and did a very serious self-evaluation. One of the things that Creighton Abrams should be revered for is when a number of the junior officers, junior to him, some of them were generals, started saying we'd been stabbed in the back by the civilians. Abrams said they couldn't have done that if we didn't allow them to do that.
yes.
So
No, Mark, I agree with you. It's the problem is not in the civil military relation. The problem here is not that the civilians somehow undermined the military command. We didn't lose in Afghanistan because the civilians undermined us. I will say the military, where the one thing that was lacking, and you remember we started the whole conversation when we started this, is President Bush failed to identify, he failed to give a vision to the American people. What is victory going to look like? How are we going to measure it? Mr. Obama, in 8 years of his administration, never once did that. Mr. Trump, from a cry from the heart, recognizing this can't go on, not one of his general staff, not one of his military advisors came to him and said, Mr. President, you got to tell us what victory looks like, and you got to tell us how we're going to measure it. If you can't say that, then we got to figure out how to disengage. They didn't do that. If they did it, they didn't come out and say, we tried to tell Mr. Trump what we needed. It is, I've been, I've been beating his drum since about 2005, when I remember coming, expressing this first, and I was just it seems so far away now that I can't even hardly remember it. It's the every one of the senior military officers, if they claim that they weren't given the information that they needed to be able to design a force and field it to meet the president's strategic objectives, if they asked for it, they sure as heck, when not getting it, didn't turn around and say, I can't do this job unless you tell me how we're going to do this. I can't build an army to accomplish a mission if I don't know what the mission is. And the services, the inter-service rivalry that I've seen, in the last 10 years of my career and ever since then, it's just this incoherence. The Navy is at war with itself, trying to decide what war to prepare for. The Army struggles with itself because the various factions within each of the services, they're each trying to stake out their own piece of the world. There's no coherence. There is no coherent strategic vision for the armed forces. In the absence of that, they're going to continue to go to Congress, and every one of them is going to say, I want 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and I'm going to, and I always want more.
Yeah.
Until we have a coherent strategic vision, the military can't be expected to know how to fight, and they will fight among themselves administratively in the absence of a clear mission.
they're getting very good at that.
Yes, they are. You know, if we're not preparing for a naval war in the West Pacific right now, and the Navy isn't, I can't see that there's any coherent. Yes, there are some admirals who are saying we have to prepare for a war against China.
Yeah.
I believe that the Marine Corps Commandant recently said we need to restructure the Marine Corps to focus on their core mission. Fighting in Afghanistan should have never been a Marine Corps mission. Fighting in Iraq should have never been. There shouldn't have been a single Marine other than if we needed them to take Basra. If we didn't need them to take Basra, and this is no reflection on the fighting capacity of the Marine Corps. I have dear friends who are in the Marine Corps. I have tremendous respect. I wish the Army knew how to focus on combat operations the Marine Corps does. But the simple fact of the matter is the Marines shouldn't be engaged in sustained land war combat, because it's not what they're designed for. They should be entirely focused on power projection from the sea, fighting the first 30 to 60 days to effect lodgment so that the U.S. Army, the heavy hammer of land power projection, can come in and bam, win the land war. But the fact that the Marine Corps has been tied up in Afghanistan and Iraq for 20 years is a disgrace. And it's largely because the Marines said, hey, wherever the fight is, we want to go to the fight. Yeah, I get it. Cool. Okay, you guys need to be focusing on how we're going to win in the Pacific, because that's where the Navy fight is. The Army has to be prepared to take a significant cut in standing land force capability and turn that over to the reserve components, because we can't get the Army any faster in the fight than whatever our power projection capability is. Having a bunch of brigade combat teams standing around when we can't get them into the fight any faster is it's wasted money. We should invest that in National Guard brigade combat teams, because I've seen these brigade combat teams can be brought up to full combat readiness comparable to the regular Army in anywhere from 120 to 180 days. And if that's the time it takes to turn the power projection, there it is. Forgive me, guys. I guess I totally bogarted the decision, but I just
You're giving us a clinic. We love
how this little old retired 06 can be seeing this, and the guys wearing all that fruit salad.
Well, that one's easy.
Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath.
I can give you the answer to that.
Yeah.
The answer is you're not worried about your career. They are. And they're afraid if they give the wrong answer, they don't get the next star.
I mean, there's no one below the rank of Major General. Major General and below, no one can be blamed for where we're at. I mean, because by the time a division commander as a 2-star Major General is competitive for 3-star, if they're already well suited to the political environment of being a lieutenant general and a full general, they're already being weeded out. They're simply not going to be selected for 3 stars if they haven't already been vetted and said, this guy or this gal is a good fit for this environment. A warfighting, a hard-charging 2-star who really is still a warrior, they're not going to get promoted. They're just not.
Yep.
A Major General Patton, in Patton was in 1940. Patton was still in 06, so he went from 06 to Brigadier General to 2-star in the span of about 18 months.
Yep.
A warfighting division commander like Patton, when he commanded the 2nd Armored Division, Patton would never have gotten. And there's a handful. Joe Stilwell would have never been promoted. To take nothing away from Eisenhower, but Eisenhower was an excellent organizer, marshal, an excellent organizer and trainer.
Did you know what the Roosevelt said about Eisenhower right around in Tunis? In Morocco, the Morocco
I'm
campaign?
not sure that
He said, "I don't promote losers."
There's a reason why Friedendahl got canned.
Yep. And Eisenhower, but the British apparently liked. There are people who think they recognized him, and they said, you're in the wrong slot. He was basically the deputy commander at the time. We want him up, we want him in the 3 or 4 star command, and we'll put in Alexander as his second in command, and this will work. And it did.
Yeah, and full marks to Marshall for recognizing, because he had to reach really down. When he reached down to Eisenhower, Eisenhower was still lieutenant colonel at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, he really went deep into the bench, and he recognized. And I would say that's one of Marshall's many great talents, is recognizing the organizational ability that senior command was going to require.
Yeah.
And the ability to be a diplomat with all the people, all those crazy personalities, where in World War II, you get these, you're going to have Alexander, who's not too bad, but you're going to have Monty and Patton and Bradley and Clark, who I think is the kind of guy who would be promoted to a 4-star general in the current army, from what I can tell.
I think so.
Definitely.
But
And he was one of the least competent army commanders we had.
anyways, looking at that kind of stuff is great. I'm reminded of something that happened, and it's a little off topic, but I was reading the book Cobra 2 about the invasion of Iraq, and it ends with, of course, with conquest of Baghdad. But there's a kind of an afternote chapter, and there's a Marine division that's assigned to a city. It's the 1st Marine under Mattis. And the city is completely and utterly quiet. Everything's fine. It's all good. There's no riots. There's no problems. And the 82nd Airborne, I believe, shows up and takes over for the unit. And so it looks at the deployments as like, you've got this all wrong. This is terrible. We're going to have to fix everything up here. And in 2 weeks, the city was on fire. And the name of that city was Fallujah.
I'm only laughing because one of my classmates at Carlisle happened to he ended up being the commander of a battalion task force that was 3, if I remember correctly, he had 3 companies of U.S. Army, 2 companies of Marines, and they were fully, completely integrated. It was a remarkable, and he happened to be there on the cutting edge of the Anbar when the
Anbar Awakening.
Yeah, the Anbar Awakening. And by his own admission, he would say, we were just fortunate that we hit the right combination of factors of application of force, integration with the Iraqi forces, building camaraderie with building sustainable relationships with the community. We spoke the same, the Marines and the Army spoke each other's language, mutual respect. And he says at the end of his command tour, he got called up to starting briefing at the brigade level and then the division level and all the way up to the corps level. And they kept asking him, well, how did you do it? Because we want to replicate your success. And he would lay out everything that he had done and then says, well, which one was the key factor that we can replicate? And as I recall him telling our class there at Carlisle, he's going, I looked at them and said, I don't know. This is so complex a situation. You're asking me to isolate a single variable. And I'm not going to guess. I can tell you what we did. I can tell you what happened. But asking me what the magic silver bullet was is foolishness. And in hindsight, he probably was one of the best infantry leaders I ever knew. And the fact of the matter is that he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and he said, I'll never make colonel. I mean, he was talking among our classmates, and he said, I'm never going to make 06. They're never going to trust me with a brigade because I don't tell them what they want to hear. Right. And when I eventually heard what happened to him, yeah, he finished his final, and at 27 years, he got out as lieutenant colonel. One of the most successful tactical leaders in the Anbar Awakening, truly at the cutting edge. And there was no place for him in the senior officer ranks. And this was West Point dynasty. I mean, his father had been a general
Oh,
officer
wow. Okay.
at West Point, and he, I mean, as I say, one of the finest soldiers. I have tremendous respect for him, but the candor with which he explained what was going on was like, at the time, I'm thinking, this can't possibly. Yeah, it can possibly, and it did.
I'm reminded of a current. I can't remember the name of the guy, but in World War II, at the end of World War II, he is the youngest light colonel in the U.S. Army, and he ends up being one of the top guys at MACD SOG. And when he shows up, he's the oldest light colonel in the U.S. Army.
I forget the name, but I remember the reference.
Yeah.
There was one question that I believe it was Jerry Gordino on our list of when we were soliciting questions, and he asked, well, he wanted to make sure that no one on the panel was just simply agreeing with everybody else. And I thought that was a very fair question.
Yeah.
And so I was hoping that he might either be listening, maybe on the chat, maybe he can give us his, I'll take a stab at giving an alternative viewpoint, but I'd kind of like to know what exactly. I'll try to make the argument from the other side of a debate, but is there something in particular he'd like me to take a stab at? Because it's a very good point. It'd be good if we had someone on here who is arguing in favor of how the pullout went, how the surrender went. If we have someone who can speak to that.
I think you're going to have to search a very, very long way to do that.
I mean, I appreciate what Jerry's asking for, and I realize I may not be the best one who can provide it. I wouldn't want to suggest that we're falling into groupthink. The situation in Afghanistan was incredibly complex, and it had been set up for failure for decades. I was no more in favor of staying in Afghanistan just to stay in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I can say a few things about it. I've been reading Scott Horton's book. He's a libertarian, and and a bit of a pacifist. He writes for antiwar.com, but he's written a very good book on what happened in Afghanistan. And he points out in 2002, it's over. The war is over. The United States has completely won. The Taliban surrendered. They've gone home. They've even disarmed. But the problem is that what ends up happening is American commanders start showing up, and they're like, well, we're here to fight terrorists. Where's the terrorists? And the Afghan national guys, the Tajiks and all those guys up in the north said, oh, I can find you some terrorists, and starts feeding them intel. And they start blowing up friendly convoys of all these people coming in because these guys are basically using the United States Army to go after their rivals.
Yeah.
And so within a year or two, the Taliban are reformed because they're like, well, we can't, we gave you your chance and you blew it. And now we have to wait because they were willing to take a chance on Karzai. They thought, oh, well, we're not, this Islamic Republic doesn't sound too bad, but they were like, Omar Mullah, whatever his name is, he went home.
The failure of the offensive Anaconda 2 against Tora Bora, I think was the key turning point. We attempted to turn what had been an irregular militia-based, perfect special operations concept, and the U.S. Army essentially decided to turn it into a conventional, heavy land force power projection. Now, had we actually completed the mission and reduced Tora Bora to rubble, which we didn't, I still don't understand the decision not to use the overwhelming firepower we had.
You probably won't like the answer, but I heard speculation on why it did happen, because there's 4,000 troops Marines under Mattis available to cut off the retreat. If Osama bin Laden's captured or killed, why would you have any reason to invade Iraq?
I am not the least bit. I've heard. I mean, yes, I'm aware of that, and I know that the administration's attention had already turned to Iraq. I'm not going to argue in favor of invading Iraq for that reason.
Mhm.
I think the justifications regarding Iraq stand on their own merits, one way
Yeah.
or the other. But the simple fact that when the decision was made not to bring what the American military does best,
Right.
which is overwhelming firepower delivered from a distance, we didn't even do what we do best.
Right.
I truly don't understand that. And even as a professor of international relations, understanding the complexity of the relationship with Pakistan, I can understand it intellectually.
Mhm.
In here, no, I don't get it. I'm sorry. There's as a soldier, I look at it and go, how many soldiers and Marines died for what was essentially a fool's errand
Mhm.
with regards to Pakistan?
Yeah. Like, why can't the guys kept saying, why can't we the Pakistan? You really don't think the Pakistan army would have like let you do a hot pursuit into their country? Like you could have done that. There's like,
Yeah, at the highest diplomatic levels, the decision was made that we have to maintain good relations with Pakistan, and so
Yeah.
we're going to accept this inconclusive result, knowing that, and then we're going to trust. You know, we're gonna hope. Well, there's an old saw that says hope is not a strategy.
Mhm.
But that's what we did with regards to Pakistan. And we've now paid that price. It's a contributing factor in what was a 20-year defeat.
Right. As I said in multiple places, it's like the problem for America, this is kind of like is a revenge for 9/11, and there is some strategic value to this, but it's not going to break your country. But for Pakistan, they need Afghanistan. It's
Yeah.
like this is do or die. This is like giving up Texas.
Yeah, they see Afghanistan as being part of their necessary strategic death in their existential conflict with India.
Yeah. And no one wanted to talk about that at any level, from what I can tell.
And as far as I can tell, we still don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Again, I have been dominating the conversation. Please,
Yes, no problem.
You know, we're an hour into it. What else might we answer?
Well, we have both Jerry and Henry Castaigne have been asking, what is the long-term threat of political Islam? Jerry's worried about migration. I mean, that was really what the war, when you get down to war on terrorists, we're fighting we weren't worried about IRA bombers. We were worried about Muslim terrorists at all levels.
Well, Mark, do you want to take a stab at this one? I mean, I've got an idea, but it's not quite in the.
And this is going to sound a little bit strange,
Mhm.
but to some extent, Islamic terrorism can work in the Middle East, and they can do jihad in Muslim countries. However, I think that they would find it difficult to sustain a terror campaign in the United States unless they got the active cooperation of the federal government. What do I mean by the active cooperation of the federal government? I mean the government deciding that they're not going to worry about the Islamic terrorists, they're going to instead worry about the non-existent white supremacists. My fear is that, yes, we'll see terror attacks in the United States because this war, despite what Biden said, this war isn't over. It's only over in Pakistan. And I mean, not in Afghanistan. And, you know, we've got an open border to the south, and they'll be feeling their oats. They think that they chased us out rather than we left as a choice of the president. And they'll try terror attacks in the United States. But I think the current administration will see that as a feature, not a bug, because they have been pushing for gun control, disarming the American public. and they can use this as a reason to do that. They've also been pushing things such as internal travel controls. That's essentially what the vaccine passports are. Well, now we can do that on the basis of national security. So this is a problem that shouldn't remain a major problem for long. However, my fear is that there is too much incentive for the government to let it run so that they can continue remaking America. That may seem like a pretty grim prospect, but that's my fear right now.
I think that I agree with your strategic analysis. In the short run, I don't believe that enough refugees from Afghan are actually going to make it here to make a substantive difference.
Right.
If they settle, if they are all purposefully settled and they're likely to want to live in regional proximity to each other, just as Somali refugees settled in large numbers in particular districts in of all places, Minnesota, that they can, in fact, they will eventually
We're tired of the Somali summers.
well, they will in fact represent a constituency that begins to get their own candidates elected to Congress, and those candidates can have tremendous influence. But I would say that's probably 10 to 20 years down the road. It's not an immediate threat. I just, one of the facts of the matter of our incredibly shambling retreat, this wholesale, it had the effect of simply not taking out practically I'd say if we got less than 10% of the Afghans who were actually issued visas out, I would be amazed if the number's any higher than that. The vast majority of them got left behind, and they're not going to come to the United States because they're going to be killed. So I don't see a massive influx of Afghani refugees that are eventually going to turn against the U.S. and seek Islamism, radical Islam, as a terrorist threat. Now, once again, I could be mistaken, but that's my gut read. I think the bigger issue is any group of refugees, any group of undocumented illegal immigrants coming to the United States, if they were arriving, this becomes a domestic policy issue. If they arrive and their children come into American schools, and after 12 years of American schooling, they come to love and appreciate the United States because of the very values that welcomed them and recognized their worth. If we make them good Americans in line with our traditional, I'm going to use a dirty word here, the Anglo heritage of the Enlightenment and our English values. I know I'm speaking totally, I'm going to get totally canceled for this, but the fact of the matter is the Western civilization that of which England and Britain were a part, that became our heritage and the founding of this country. We teach them that. We don't have to worry about them, but we don't do that. We don't teach our own children, much less the children of illegal immigrants, much less the children of refugees. So it's a failure of domestic policy that's going to create the window of opportunity for those who hate us to attack us from within.
And again,
and this is me talking not as a soldier, but as a teacher.
Right. But again, I'll point out, I don't think that you can get a Islamic terror jihad in the United States because of the values of this country, even the secular people of this country. But
yes, I agree with you.
I can see individual attacks occurring largely because the Taliban and ISIS will continue to count true on the United States. And I see a domestic crackdown by the federal government, not against them, but against their political opponents, using that as an excuse to crack down on their political opponents. And that's when they're getting from Roman Republic to Roman Empire aid to the United States.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're very correct.
Okay, so I
hope I'm not.
I got some good news and bad news on this front. So the bad news first is remember all those stories coming out of Europe over the last few years about refugees, migrant gangs attacking women and all that. What is little known is that it wasn't Syrian refugees who were doing that. It wasn't other refugees. It came from one specific country, and that was Afghanistan. This I was reading it in national in the national interest. But it does seem to be only one specific ethnic group that was really responsible for most of those, and it was Afghani refugees. So you're bringing that in. On the larger picture, I was listening to Zbigniew Brzezinski's one of his books, and he was talking about at the start of the war on terror. What was coincidentally happening is there was a huge youth bulge in Muslim populations around the world. And that youth bulge has now aged out into, his book was right in the middle of 2008, 2009. So he says, we're right in the middle of the youth bulge right now. But by 2021, this youth bulge is going to be all old men. And you're going to see a decline in the result of terrorist attacks and other things, because Islam gets, when all these guys who now are getting jobs and settling down with wives and kids and don't want to go and kill everyone anymore. So that is sort of like we are entering that kind of phase. And that's why I think we were like the war on terror is kind of like an interregnum period. And we're going to be going back to more great power stuff as this is happening. And the final good news is that one of the reasons that they come over here and kill Americans, they don't care, or Westerners, they don't really care that much about the fact that we're seculars and we're infidels. What they're pissed off is that we're going over there and killing their people. Like there's a lot of media trying to make this look bad, but the person who killed all those people in that nightclub in Florida back in 2016 during the election, the witnesses reported that he was yelling at the top of his lungs, "I'm here killing you because you're killing my family in Afghanistan." They do seem to want, a lot of the terrorist attacks that did happen domestically, the Sanara brothers, they were pissed off because of your troops being over there attacking people. And they're like, we have to get revenge for all the people who are killing and bombing and strafing in Afghanistan and Iraq. So if you're not in there doing that kind of stuff, that does seem to be a real thing, is that these people are pissed off about that. They're pissed off, and we saw that with Israel as well. And of course, we're just going to have to deal with that forever. But
well, I sincerely hope that is in fact the case.
Yeah, same
I remain. I'll just say that my people are from Missouri.
Yeah, it does. It's looks like you got to remember, Osama bin Laden's plan was for you to overreact, attack them there, and then basically make you go through what they did to the Soviets. That was his plan. He always wanted you to do what the 20 years in Afghanistan, and now you're on the way out. And he wants all America and the West out of, he wanted you guys out of the Middle East so that they could overthrow their governments and install. And then maybe then, once they have installed all Muslim Brotherhood-like countries, governments, then they'll attack. But they wanted you out first.
Now, the irony, of course, is we don't need Middle East oil anymore. Yeah. Except now we do, thanks to the current president's policies. So,
well, I would have to say that we're at an hour and 15 minutes. Is there, David? Is there any other questions that we feel that we ought to owe the folks who gave us questions to answer?
I'm looking at here. We have there's a CT Law started talking about the fact that what are we going to see a famine in that? And then I have a couple questions here from Yosuke Weasel Wrangler. So the fact is that Afghanistan is very heavily dependent on foreign aid, and their only crop seems to be heroin. And so do we think, oh yeah. And it used to be before the Soviets showed up, they used to have like a vibrant, very poor, but decent agricultural economy with orchards and all and trees and everything that makes they could feed themselves. But now they're dependent on the West for food. Do we think that will be a famine, and how will the Taliban react to that?
I think that yeah, I don't know. I suspect what will happen is that the Taliban will appeal to world opinion and essentially make the case that they won, they're entitled to reparations from those who lost. Reparations are they're recognized by international law as being valid, that the winner in a traditional war setting can affect reparations upon the loser for the cost of the war, and I expect that the Taliban will likely make that exact argument. It'll remain to see how many hostages do they have that become the bargaining chip with which they within the diplomatic realm, they quietly start saying, we have 100 Americans. If you don't provide food support in the form of that we can claim are reparations that the winner is exacting upon the loser, we're going to, we'll start killing hostages. And I believe that this administration will, under the guise of cooperation with the new regime and in the interest of world peace, will do precisely what they want, because they don't want to. They're afraid of being blamed for an international, for a famine, particularly one that they feel that really was our fault. We exacted it upon them, and so we should make good. I think that's what this administration will do.
I think you think more highly of Joe Biden's humanity than I do. I think he's just as likely to let them swing in the wind as he was the people that worked for us, unless, of course, they can come up with a kickback on what the United States pays them.
No argument there. The only thing that will motivate Joe Biden is the prospect of bad press. That's all. It's not that he cares. It's that if the press starts, if he can shape the press for being, look at what an empathetic, wonderful guy I am, and the press goes along with it, he'll happily spend US dollars that we don't actually have, that we have to get from selling bonds to the Chinese. Yeah, he'll do that. He'll spend someone else's money in order to one, affect his own benefit, and particularly if he's getting a kickback.
And it's also an excellent opportunity for some other governments, including China and Russia, to kind of step in and offer food, since they're right there. And
certainly,
they want, and Russia now exports food. So there you go. We have a. This is more a question from me to you guys. Ross Perot was kind of famous. I kind of forgot about this about him, but he was kind of famous for being involved in the lost. The soldiers left behind in Vietnam, and we have all these Americans left behind in Afghanistan, as well as other people. Will that? Some people think that this will all just be swept under the rug in 3 weeks, but do we think that could become an enduring narrative into this story that kind of stays with us forever? Because in the way that, in like Ross Perot's, I understand, it was like 50 left behind soldiers in Vietnam. Will that become kind of a thing? Do we think there's going to be like a story of this? We were once again stabbed in the back by the civilians. Someone else mentioned that. What do we think about that?
Well, I would just make the observation that it took a decade for the POW MIA issue to become part of the broader American
Mhm.
consciousness.
Mhm.
From the fall of Saigon in '73 until I would
75.
say 84. Yeah, you're right. Yes, you're right. 75.
You're thinking the
But
Paris Peace Accords.
yes, you're absolutely right. From 75, it wasn't until I'm going to say 82, 83 that the POW issue really, the POW MIA issue really took that long for it to become part of the American consciousness. Do I think it's going to depend on whether or not personally, I don't trust when the State Department says there's 100 to 200 Americans, I would triple that right off the bat. I think that they're purposefully undercounting. There may be upwards of over 1,000 Americans who were left at the gates. And it's only going to become a public issue if their families can get traction in the public eye. And the mass media is going to do, I mean, the mainstream media is going to do everything they can. Yes, you can already see they're trying to dismiss this, brush it under. They want this issue to go away, and they're promoting the administration's propaganda that this was a great victory. So it's going to, but the internet provides a means of dissemination of information that Perot never had, but it took a decade for that issue to become part of the American consciousness.
The thing is, I don't think the American left behinds are going to go away quickly. Number one, I suspect the numbers are not hundreds. I suspect they're thousands, and possibly as high as 10,000 to 15,000. There were estimates that there were up to 40,000 American citizens in Afghanistan back in late July and August. And we only got, 5,000 out? And you're telling me there are only a few hundred left? They're going to try the whole thing as well. Everyone that wanted to get out did get out. And people that are still there, they really wanted to stay. But I don't think they can sell that. And I know there is a tremendous amount of anger in vast swaths of this country. People that are not normally political are furious over this. And if the press does try to turn it into a victory, it's just going to make people angry. I'm not sanguine about what's going to happen in the next few months. I may be wrong. It could be that it's only the people in Texas that are royally annoyed at this, but I don't think so. And I think that this is not ending. I think it's just started. And again, we'll see what happens. But don't look at the evening news so much as local reports and even what your friends and neighbors would say.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And I guess the last question here is from Muleskin or Weasel Wrangler. He wants to know who takes advantage of the U.S. retreat first? Xi, Putin, our friend down in North Korea?
All of the above.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a race.
Mm-hmm.
Putin definitely is. You've got what's essentially a third world country now being considered, which is Russia, now being considered the equal of the United States based on our performance. China has gained enormous influence in Central Asia and the area around it. North Korea knows that they can develop nuclear weapons without being stopped.
Mhm.
I think it's an all of the above.
Yeah, the three that you mentioned have different outcomes and different objectives. I don't really think it changes the calculus regarding North Korea.
Mhm.
That if anything, simply taking the focus off of them work to their advantage, but it doesn't really change the calculus as it stood over the last 4 years. I think China benefits more directly in a measurable way, as we talked about earlier. The economic boom that Afghanistan offers, the geostrategic advantage in eliminating a power projection platform capability from Central Asia, the crossroads, as it were, works to China's advantage far more than it does to Russia, because we still have all of the Central Asian republics, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, they all still, and they make up the principal ethnic groups that of the old Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, and those state lines on the map are largely speculative.
Yeah.
So I don't think it really advantages Russia in the immediate neighborhood. Where it does advantage Russia is it provides them with the talking point to further divide Germany from the rest of NATO and the EU. As Germany and Russia continue to develop a separate economic relationship, and Germany has the clout to essentially tell the EU, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. This is all in everyone's best interest because we want to have good relationships. We want to have a good relationship with Russia, and we're just simply leading the way. Well, as we spoke about in our last podcast, if you're Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, you get really, really nervous when Germany and Russia are cutting a deal together.
Of course.
And I think that that's the advantage. Taking us all the way back to our original question, how long will it take for the US to regain strategic credibility? If you're Poland, you may have no choice but to trust the US when you have to. And that provides the US an opportunity to begin building that credibility, because Poland is going to look and say, look, we had a good relationship with the US under Trump. Biden comes in, and we can see that it was Biden who sold out Afghanistan. If we can survive long enough for a new president and build a relationship, we have to, because quite frankly, we need the US to bring the rest of NATO along if it turns out that Germany sells us down the river. Who can imagine Germany selling Poland down the river to favor Russia? I mean, this has never happened before, has it? Of course
I
not.
definitely did not write a war game based on that entire premise.
Yes,
Published
and
several
so I
years ago
think
on
that as cynical as this sounds, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania may be the key to rebuilding US credibility if the US honors its commitments. But to do that, we will need a different commander-in-chief, one who can express to the US people why it's in our own strategic best interest to stand with these partners, and what does victory look like? How are we going to measure success?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
a
that
good
sounds pretty
place
good.
to end this.
Yeah, that does sound like a good place to end this. You keep, Clark, you keep asking about what's going on with the chat, and I'm thinking of changing platforms if we do any episodes like this in the future again to StreamYards, which would allow us to post directly to Ricochet and allow people to come on board and chat.
I love that we have the capacity to do this. There's so much varied expertise in Ricochet, and I would just like to think wholly self-serving that I would like to make this available to as broad an audience as possible. You know, and if it allows Mark to sell more books,
I won't object.
it's no objection.
Yeah.
And if we can get, like, as I say, I mentioned that Arizona Patriot.
Yeah,
I
Jerry's
thought his
good.
comment regarding the prospect of having a true pro-con, another voice, he's exactly right. That would benefit having that. It would give us greater depth, and I think the quality of the discussion.
Yeah. I'm not too sure who else who we have on Ricochet who could do the pacifist stuff, but there must be a couple libertarians running around here.
I just, someone who's willing to step up and give a respectful read. It's valid to have that other side of the coin.
Right. It's also worth pointing out that all it takes is the courage to stand up and speak on this platform. That none of the three of us are really as devastating as we believe ourselves to be. So,
I can't hurt anybody. As I say, I'm one over the hill, long in the tooth, old soldier. I'm.
I would like to see DA Venters come on.
Oh wow,
that would be an interesting.
Oh yes,
there'd be some fireworks.
Yep, that would be. Yes.
Well, but he's really respectful and he sincerely believes what he says. I would love to hear him.
Yes,
I have talked to Gary Robbins. He does not want to do. He doesn't want to do a show.
I can appreciate why
he's a practicing lawyer. That's why.
Yes, I can appreciate why that would be for the same reason that CT Law is just he has to be mindful of his practice and his place in the community. I respect that 100%.
Yeah, but Jerry has definitely come on a couple times. He did the election panel with us where we tried to figure out a way to save Trump, and it didn't work out too well. But
no. All right, gentlemen. Well, I've certainly enjoyed this.
Yep.
And I look forward to being invited back.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll have to do another one of these maybe in a month or so, or whenever there's another crisis, we can get together. Okay.
Oh, then that'll be every week.
Hey, not too bad.
You have me thinking about a prospect for the next show, which would be what has happened to Russia, China, and the United States in the last 40 years that we end up in this strange predicament that we're in today. Russia is a third world country, China is a first world country, and the United States is confused and feckless. How'd that happen? How did that happen?
It's a fascinating question. It's one that my students and I enjoy discussing quite a bit. So it'd be a wonderful topic for discussion.
Okay, great. See you guys on the comments on Ricochet. Bye-bye.
Bye.